Before we move to First Minister's questions, party leaders will make some remarks before Remembrance, and I call the First Minister.
Presiding Officer, this Sunday we once again pause to remember those brave men and women who so selflessly laid down their lives to protect our country and to provide us with the freedoms and the security that we enjoy today. In our shared moment of silence, in the poppies that we wear, in parades and in solemn ceremonies, we honour their courage and their sacrifice. We will always remember who they were and what they did for us, countless men and women who fought to protect and preserve our democratic way of life. And so, alongside our acts of remembrance over this coming week, let us commit ourselves once again to those same fundamental values that define who we are as a nation. We do that so that their great sacrifice may never be in vain.
Thank you. I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, President Officer. On Remembrance Sunday, our nation will stand in collective silence to remember the men and women who made the ultimate sacrifice to defend our country and our freedom. The powerful symbol of our remembrance is the poppy which grew on the battlefields of the First World War. Now, I had the recent privilege of visiting Lady Haig's poppy factory in Edinburgh. The veterans who work there have seen service in every British military campaign since the early 1970s. And it was an honour to talk with them about conflict, loss and remembrance. And they want us to remember not just on one day, but every day. And not only those who served in the past, but those serving now. Our remembrance is about history and about respecting those who keep us safe today. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In the coming days, we'll mark Remembrance Day, a time when we reflect on the heroic sacrifices made by armed forces across World War I, World War II, and since in defence of our freedoms, our democracy, and also in highlighting the struggle against fascism, both in the Second World War, but against the forces that seek to divide us today. And we should also remember those that continue to serve in our armed forces and make a commitment to them that we will protect them and their families, both while they serve, but also after they retire from service. But it's also an opportunity for us to redouble our commitment to peace and to freedom for all right across the globe. So let us remember all those that have made the ultimate sacrifice. Let us redouble our commitment to all those that continue to serve, and let's remember those and say that their service will never, ever be forgotten.
I call Ross Greer.
Thank you. Sunday is a time to remember. It's a time to remember and to mourn every victim of war, and we should always remember that civilians bear a particularly heavy price. But it is also a time for us to honour those who fought and died for us, particularly in the fight against fascism. It's a day to remember and to give thanks, but also to recommit to preventing a repeat of the darkest periods of our history. As has just been mentioned, the politics of hate and division are on the rise again today. So we honour the sacrifice of those who were forced to defeat that by force of arms in our past. But we also need to work to ensure that no generation is ever forced to do so again.
I call Willie Rennie.
This moment must never be routine. As the years passed, it's natural that the sheer enormity of the horror of the First and Second World War diminishes. But as those years pass, the more important it is that we all stand together to make these simple but powerful points that we will never forget their sacrifice, because it was horrific. Every family was affected right across the land. So the more the years pass, the more we must stand together, the more we must never forget those sacrifices and the commitment that we make never to repeat that again.
Thank you. We move to our next item of business, which is First Minister's questions, and I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, President Officer. Rachel Reeves is going to raise taxes. Is John Swinney going to do the same?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, obviously there has been a huge amount of speculation about the United Kingdom Government's budget. The Scottish Government will set out our position on tax in the budget on the 13th of January, and we will obviously be considering all of the issues and the implications of the United Kingdom Government's budget in November.
Russell Finlay.
Well, Labour are breaking promise after promise. Rachel Reeves called last year's budget, and I quote, a once-in-a-parliament event. She claimed she would not be coming back with more tax rises this year. She claimed that she would stick to her manifesto promise not to raise income tax, not to hit working people with higher bills. But that's exactly what Labour are set to do. If John Swinney won't rule out tax rises, does he think that they're right to increase income tax?
First Minister.
Decisions have to be taken very carefully on tax issues, and the Chancellor will be accountable for the decisions that she makes, and the Scottish Government will take our decisions accordingly and respond. I would observe that the decision taken in the budget last year, to which Mr Finlay has referred, to increase employers' national insurance contributions has had a profoundly damaging effect on the economy in a whole variety of different areas, whether that's about increasing the cost of employment, which for a government that is apparently focused on a growth agenda, it's an absurd policy decision to have taken, because the decision to increase employers' national insurance contributions is stifling growth in our country today.
Russell Finlay.
Entirely with the First Minister about the employees' national insurance contributions, but he doesn't seem to know if he supports Labour's tax rises or not. So I'd like to remind him what he said after last year's UK budget, and I quote, "The UK government should have increased income tax, and it will be a hammer blow to Scottish workers. We've got two left-wing parties that only want to tax, tax, tax. Labour are doing the same as the SNP have done for the past decade. Most workers in Scotland pay more than those in the rest of the UK who do the same job and earn the same amount. The SNP have increased taxes, driven away aspirational workers, damaged business confidence and held back Scotland's economy. People
Let's hear Mr Finlay.
Deserve a break. So will John Swinney give a cast-iron guarantee of no further tax rises, income, business and property in the Scottish budget?
First Minister.
Well, Mr Finlay won't be surprised to hear me say that these questions will be answered in the budget when the Scottish Government sets out to Parliament the commitments that we are going to make. And of course, we have asked some people in Scotland to pay more in taxation, but what I would say is that the Independent Scottish Fiscal Commission has confirmed that the majority of taxpayers in Scotland are set to pay less than they would elsewhere in the United Kingdom this year. So that's the judgment of the Independent Scottish Fiscal Commission. Now, of course, the public finances that we put in place as a consequence of our decisions pay for different provisions here in Scotland. They mean that there are no tuition fees paid in our universities by university students. They mean that there is free bus travel for under-22s. They mean that there are no prescription charges levied in Scotland. They mean that the Scottish Child Payment is helping to keep children out of poverty, with a falling level of child poverty in Scotland. So yes, there are tax issues to be confronted, but there are also public expenditure decisions that are improving the lives of people in Scotland today.
Russell Finlay.
Well, John Swinney is spinning like a washing machine. Last month, he accused me of misleading Parliament about what I said, and in doing so, he misled Parliament. And he's at it again today. I'll say it once more. More Scottish workers pay more income tax than those in the rest of the UK. And John Swinney's answers today won't assure any Scottish worker, homeowner or business owner. He won't rule out increasing the tax on buying a home. He won't rule out raising taxes on businesses. And it seems that he's plotting yet another income tax raid on hard-working Scots. And on top of all that, the SNP plan could result in massive rises to council tax, reportedly as high as £6,500 a year. Raising taxes every year is not sustainable. Workers and businesses can't afford it. People deserve to keep more of their own hard-earned cash. So shouldn't John Swinney be looking to bring bills down, not hiking them higher year after year after year?
At simply point out to Russell Finlay that the council tax in Scotland is lower on average than it is in properties in England, and that's happened. That's the position today, where the council tax is much lower. And as I've said in my earlier answer, the majority of taxpayers in Scotland are set to pay less than they would elsewhere in the United Kingdom this year, and that's according to the Independent Fiscal Commission in Scotland. Now, what my government will do is what we've always done, which is we will bring forward orderly budget provisions which will relate to the tax and spending commitments, so that we can fund our public services and fund the investments in the Scottish economy. And of course, what we have heard from Russell Finlay and the Conservatives on a consistent period of time is that they are not prepared to engage in the tough judgments about delivering for public services. They keep on asking for more money, but they won't take the decisions to enable money to take place. That is pure and utter hypocrisy, and it's what we get from the Conservatives.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Let me start by welcoming the First Minister's change of heart on holding an investigation into Scotland's maternity services. Less than 24 hours ago, after the heartbreaking testimony of mothers, he whipped his MSPs to vote against that investigation. But I'm glad he went home and thought again. Unfortunately, the situation in maternity services is just a snapshot of the crisis and chaos in our NHS. Scotland's ambulance service is also in crisis. This week we heard about Queen's Park defender Charlie Fox. Charlie suffered a serious knee injury during a match at Firhill Stadium, a 3 p.m. kick-off. An ambulance was called, but it didn't arrive until 1 a.m, nearly 10 hours later. 10 hours lying in pain. And it's just weeks after footballer Brooke Patterson was left abandoned on the pitch waiting for an ambulance. So what does John Swinney say to Charlie, to Brooke and all other Scots waiting in pain?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I'm very open with Parliament about when there are occasions when public services do not meet the reasonable and legitimate expectations of members of the public. In relation to the Brooke Patterson case, I looked into that, and the examination of the information that was available to me was there had been an error made in the classification of that call. That is regrettable, and I have apologised in writing to Brooke Patterson. In relation to the case of Charlie Fox, the length of time appears to me to be completely unacceptable that he was left to wait. The Scottish Ambulance Service are investigating the circumstances behind the incident, and I apologise for the length of time that Charlie Fox experienced in waiting for the ambulance. I would say that our public services continue to operate under enormous pressure, but they also deliver fantastic service to members of the public in most cases. Not in all cases, and where they don't deliver for all cases, they can expect the First Minister to address those issues and to apologise accordingly.
Anna Sarwar.
Week after week, John Swinney comes, apologises for the government's performance, and things continue to get worse. A month ago, he apologised for long ambulance waits, but apologies simply won't cut it anymore. When Scots call 999, they expect help to come. That's what David McClenaghan expected when he had a heart attack. He called for help and he gave his address, but when the ambulance arrived, the crew never even got out. David was later found dead on the floor. That was 7 years ago, and a fatal accident inquiry is now underway. But since then, response times have got worse. 10 years ago, 83% of life-threatening cases saw an ambulance arrive in 10 minutes. When David McClenaghan died 7 years ago, it had fallen to just 73%. Now it's 61%. That is shocking. So why is this situation continuing to get worse and worse on John Swinney's watch? And don't simply stand up and say you're sorry.
Through the Chair, always. First Minister.
I recognise that there will be occasions in which public services do not meet the expectations of members of the public. And I think the right thing to do, and no matter what Mr Sarwar puts to me and how he characterises my responses, I will be honest and open with the public in apologising where those standards are not met. What I can say is that Scottish Ambulance Service staffing is up by 31% in the last 10 years, that we have more paramedics, they're up by 57.6% in the last 10 years. And what I can also say is that median response times for purple calls was 7 minutes 51 seconds on the most recent data that's available to me. So there is, and that information is relevant and important because it will relate to the optimum time for the delivery of a response by the Scottish Ambulance Service. So our staff are working with more resources, under incredible demands, to meet the expectations for members of the public, and in the overwhelming majority of cases in the country, that is exactly what they do.
Anna Sarwar.
That's the First Minister's response to hearing that 10 years ago, 83% of life-threatening cases saw an ambulance arrive in 10 minutes. 7 years ago, it was 73%, and now it's only 61%. That is putting lives at risk right across the country. And John Swinney and the SNP are failing our NHS and failing the people of Scotland every single day. On his watch, we have an ambulance crisis putting lives in danger, a patient waiting over 4 years for cardiology and neurosurgery consultations, another patient waiting 6 years for general surgery, a child waiting 5.5 years for surgery, and shockingly, one Scot waiting 8 years to be seen. 8 years. That's 5 SNP health secretaries. That's 3 SNP First Ministers. It's even a new king and a new pope, but still no treatment. So enough of the apologies, because they simply won't cut it anymore. Doesn't this prove that Scotland's NHS can't risk a third decade of this tired and incompetent SNP government?
First Minister.
As I've said, Presiding Officer, where there are failings in our public services, I will honestly and candidly accept them and be held to account for them. But equally, I will set out to Parliament the progress that has been made under my leadership in improving the performance of the National Health Service. So Mr Sarwar has cited issues about long waits, and I've looked very closely at long waits along with the Health Secretary. In a whole range of individual cases, there can be significant complexities and health implications which make it impossible for particular procedures to be taken forward because of the vulnerability of patients involved. In general, however, there are too many people waiting too long, which is why we now have reductions in the size of waiting lists. That is why we have reductions in long waits as well, with all of the long waits categories of 12 months, 24 months, 36 months coming down. We also see an increase in the number of procedures being undertaken within the National Health Service. What that means is that more people are being treated and more procedures are being delivered. And of course, in the last year, as I've told Parliament before, and just so that Mr Sarwar doesn't forget about it, we had a record number of hip and knee operations last year, demonstrating the progress that the National Health Service is making under my leadership. I'm determined to deliver for the people of Scotland. That's what the initiatives and the investment that we're making is delivering, and we intend to ensure that's applicable in every part of the country for the people of our country.
Question number 3, Ross Greer.
Thank you. The fossil fuel giant Equinor has submitted a new application to drill for more oil in the North Sea. But this time they've had to admit... Let's
be courteous.
This time, Presiding Officer, they've had to admit that the Rosebank oil field will be 50 times more polluting than what they first claimed. 250 million tonnes of carbon emissions, accelerating climate breakdown and destroying our hopes of keeping our planet safe. The First Minister's predecessors were crystal clear in their opposition to Rosebank. Nicola Sturgeon agreed that it would be the greatest act of environmental vandalism of her lifetime. Humza Yousaf said that approving the field was the wrong decision. But John Swinney has so far avoided taking a position, and he's quietly ditched the Scottish Government's energy strategy, the first draft of which opposed new oil and gas exploration. The science is clear. If we are to have any hope of changing course and preventing total climate breakdown, there can be no new oil and gas fields. Does the First Minister agree with Nicola Sturgeon that it would be the greatest act of environmental vandalism in our lifetime? Will he oppose the Rosebank oil field? First Minister.
The approach that the Scottish Government has taken consistently through the work of my term as First Minister, the term of Hamza Yousaf and also Nicola Sturgeon, was to insist upon the importance of a climate compatibility assessment about any development that comes forward. That is, of course, the position that has essentially been adopted in legal judgments that require the United Kingdom Government to go through the process they are currently going through in relation to the applications that are coming forward. So that is the point of consistency, that there needs to be any developments of oil and gas licensing have to be compatible with our journey to net zero. And the importance of that point is the fact, and I think this is very widely accepted, and I think members of the Green Party accept this, there will be for some time a requirement to utilise fossil fuels as we transition from our current situation to net zero. And the question that has to be addressed, given the requirements of society in that respect, is can any of that activity be compatible with our journey to net zero? And that's the policy position of the Scottish Government.
Ross Greer.
I asked the First Minister a yes or no question, but I didn't get an answer to it. Both of his predecessors were capable of giving a clear answer to that question. He says it's a question of climate compatibility, but Equinor have just admitted Rosebank would be 250 million tonnes of new carbon emissions. That is clearly incompatible with any chance of meeting our climate ambitions. However the First Minister spins it, approving Rosebank would be a disaster for people and planet. It will do nothing to reduce energy bills. All it will do is funnel more money into the pockets of Equinor's super-rich shareholders. And every single penny these mega-polluters and governments sink into new oil and gas projects takes us even further away from the investment in renewables that we really need. The two most recent former First Ministers were brave enough to say this, but today the SNP's Westminster leader, Stephen Flynn, demanded the UK Government hand these planet-wrecking corporations a tax cut. The First Minister needs to pick a side, so I ask him again, will he oppose the Rosebank oil field?
First Minister.
Well, I think people will generally see me to be on Scotland's side in everything that I do. I have to be.
First Minister, sorry, I'm finding it difficult to hear here, and I know that those who have gathered in the gallery with us today would like to hear whoever is called to speak. First Minister.
And I have to be mindful, Presiding Officer, of the fact that we are delivering a just transition. Not any old transition, a just transition. A just transition that enables me to look the staff of oil and gas companies in the eye and say that we are doing everything to manage the transition to avoid the industrial devastation that Scotland experienced under the mercenary actions of the Conservative Government in the 1980s, which I will not repeat. So the Scottish Government recognises, and I've explained in my first answer to Mr Greer, that there will be a need for the utilisation of some oil and gas resources for the foreseeable future. That has to be undertaken in a way that is compatible with our journey to net zero, and that is the approach the Scottish Government will take.
Question number 4, Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what discussions the Scottish Government has had with the UK Government regarding the implementation of the proposed scheme for the renovation of military homes in Scotland.
First Minister.
President Officer, when I provided evidence on behalf of the Scottish Government to the UK Government's Strategic Defence Review, I raised the fact that the quality and maintenance of service accommodation is a major concern for service families based in Scotland, and that the United Kingdom Government should ensure our service personnel and their families live in accommodation that is fit for purpose. Plans for this investment were initially announced in the Strategic Defence Review earlier this year, and to date there has been no discussions on the renovation of Ministry of Defence-owned housing in Scotland.
Christine Graham.
I thank the First Minister for his answer. And firstly, can I state, Presiding Officer, I am delighted that at last the UK Government is set on remedying the state of some military housing. And as one who represents Glencorse Barracks in my constituency, I am well aware how tough it is already for families of servicemen and women who have not a settled home, being nomadic on account of their partners' postings. So the very least they deserve is decent accommodation. So a big tick for that. However, in the recently published 124-page UK Defence Housing Strategy, there are only 4 references to devolved nations, and the use of surplus MOD land for civilian housing takes us straight into devolved competencies. So at paragraph 313, I quote, "It is important that the Defence Housing Service works in a collaborative way across the UK Government devolved governments." It appears, First Minister, there hasn't been any collaboration. Is there going to be any, or is this again trampling over devolved powers?
First Minister.
President Officer, all I can say to Christine Graham is that the Scottish Government would be very willing to take forward discussions with the UK Government, but there have been no discussions with the Ministry of Defence on their proposals on the funding of the renovation of military housing. The Scottish Government stands ready to do that because of the important issues of community connection that Christine Graham raises, and I can assure her that the Government is willing to take part in those discussions.
Question number 5, Douglas Lumsden.
To ask the First Minister when the Scottish Government will announce a timetable for improvement works on the A96 north of Inverurie following the publication of its Corridor Review consultation report.
First Minister.
President, the Scottish Government's position is that it is committed to fully dualling the A96. The feedback received following the publication of the draft Corridor Review outcomes, a summary of which was published in June, will help to inform the final decision on how best to take forward improvements while recognising the current economic challenges. Future decisions will be shaped by available and planned budgets, which will be influenced by the UK Government's autumn budget and the forthcoming Scottish Government Infrastructure Investment Plan, which will be published in the new year.
Douglas Lumsden.
First Minister, the North East has been named Scotland's road death capital after 24 people were killed and a further 384 were injured across the region last year. Since the SNP first promised to dual the A96 under Alex Salmond's government in 2011, there have been no less than 16 Transport Secretaries and Ministers, all of whom have kicked the can down the road. So will the First Minister give us an answer today? Stop playing games with the lives of motorists in the North East and finally honour his party's 2011 promise of fully dualling the A96.
First Minister.
A range of different measures have been taken by ministers to address the issues of safety on the A96. I recognise there remain significant challenges there, but ministers are fully engaged in that particular question. In relation to the capital investment programme, the Government, of course, will be setting out to Parliament in January the infrastructure investment plans and the issues that we can take forward within the current fiscal context, and that information will be shared with Parliament and subject to the usual scrutiny.
Thank you. Question number 6, Michael Mara.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the Auditor-General's report 24-25 audit of the Scottish Government consolidated accounts, which indicates a £1 billion underspend by the Scottish Government.
First Minister.
President Officer, I welcome Audit Scotland's unqualified opinion and the points raised by the Auditor-General, which recognise the underspend does not represent a loss of spending power to Scotland.
Michael Mara.
This knackered SNP government's handling of the public's money is a disaster for Scotland, and the Auditor-General could not be clearer on that point. Labour has delivered an additional £5.2 billion for Scotland's services.
Let's hear Mr Mara.
Mr Swinney ludicrously labelled that a continuation of austerity. We now know that he underspent that budget by £1 billion, while 1 in 6 Scots suffer in pain on NHS waiting lists. First Minister, where on earth has the rest of the money gone?
Through the chair, always. First Minister.
If that was an explanation of the intellectual capability of the aspiring Labour Finance Secretary, then Scotland has got a lot of trouble coming its way if Mr Mara is anywhere near the public finances. Mr Mara has been a member of this Parliament. Indeed, He's a member of the Finance Committee. He should have some idea of what he's talking about, but he's just demonstrated to Parliament he doesn't have a clue about the public finances. Not a single penny of the underspend announced in the annual accounts of the Scottish Government, which I repeat were unqualified, which is the case for every single year of this government's term in office since 2007-8. Every year an unqualified opinion, and Mr Mara doesn't understand that the resources that are contained in the underspend are all used in this current financial year, all allocated supporting the reductions in waiting lists that I'm presiding over, providing for the expansion of social security, including the Scottish Child Payment, and also, just for absolute completeness to Mr Mara, £247 million of the underspend cannot be used for public services in Scotland because it's part of the United Kingdom's control of the budget. So I suggest Mr Mara goes away and gets a book about elementary accounting before he asks me any more questions.
Thank you. Question number 7. Thank you. Beatrice Wishart.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the recent news that Eastern Airways, which runs Lifeline regional services in the Highlands and Islands, has entered administration.
First Minister.
Officer, the decision by Eastern Airways to file a notice of intention to appoint administrators is a matter of significant concern and will have a significant impact on communities and businesses. I understand this will be a worrying time for the airline staff, including those who are based at Sunborough Airport in Shetland. Should individuals be facing redundancy, the Scottish Government will provide support through our initiative for responding to redundancy situations, Partnership Action for Continuing Employment. Individuals can access support online or by calling the helpline. Advice for affected customers is also available on the Highland Council website.
Beatrice Wishart.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. The news about Eastern Airways will be devastating to over 330 workers facing redundancy, including 9 people in my constituency. The Wick to Aberdeen PSO is a lifeline route for people in the far north, and passengers need assurances now about its future. The First Minister is also aware that Sunborough Airport and its proximity to the offshore energy sector is a vital part of that North Sea connectivity network. So can he indicate what discussions the Government has had about both an alternative airline for the PSO route and transport for oil workers? And will he commit to a statement from the Scottish Government outlining its approach to the impact of Eastern Airways' collapse?
First Minister.
I recognise the significant practical issues that Beatrice Wishart raises today. The PSO for Aberdeen to Wick is a Highland Council PSO, and we are engaged with Highland Council on trying to find alternative solutions to the situation and are in regular contact with Highland Council. There have been measures put in place about alternative transport arrangements, but I do accept that the Aberdeen to Wick link is very important to the local community. So we are working with Highland Council to establish what alternatives can be brought forward, and of course I'd be very happy for members to be kept updated by the Minister on this particular issue.
Grant.
One of the issues with the link was the unreliability of the aircraft, and people were not maybe using the link as much as they should have done had it been more reliable. I wonder if the Scottish Government's given any consideration to doing the same thing as they did in Barra when the aircraft was unreliable, by purchasing aircraft and then leasing it out to an operator so that the service is reliable and can be used.
First Minister.
Well, I'm very happy to explore particular issues. As I said in my answer to Beatrice Wishart, the PSO for Wick Aberdeen is Highland Council PSO. Obviously the PSO with Barra is a Scottish Government PSO. I think no, it's not. I'm being corrected. But let me say, I'll take the issue away and see, and we'll explore what are the possibilities, because I do acknowledge that the connections are important and the distances involved for other transport mechanisms are very significant for members of the public. But we'll explore the idea that Rhoda Grant has put to me.
Thank you. We move to constituency and general supplementaries, and I call Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The UK Government recently announced £547 million for Wales as part of its local growth fund to be delivered directly by the Welsh Government. If this is a union of equals, surely Scotland must receive its consequential share. Can the First Minister confirm if the Scottish Government has received any detail as to whether this funding will be replicated in Scotland, or is Scotland being shortchanged yet again?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, this is an issue that relates to the successor funds to the European funding, which of course has been strategically of the greatest significance to Scotland over many years and has helped us with a whole range of different priorities, particularly in relation to employability and the delivery of local infrastructure. Now, what the UK Government has done is essentially provide a sum of £547 million to the Welsh Assembly Government, but it proposes to bypass the Scottish Government in deploying those resources in Scotland. This is an issue which has been raised by the Finance Secretary with the United Kingdom Government. I think the responses have been unsatisfactory, as have the details from the UK Government about the direct connection they establish with local authorities, where, frankly, the information is woefully presented to local authorities. But the key point here, which is the point that Mr Gibson raises with me, is this Labour Government in the UK is bypassing the democratic procedures here in Scotland. It's another example that the Labour Government in the United Kingdom is a government that is determined to undermine this Parliament, and people in Scotland need to waken up to the threat from the UK Labour Government.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Is the First Minister aware of the swingeing budget cuts being proposed by SNP-run Dumfries and Galloway Council? These include the closure of the Hillview Leisure Centre in Kellerholm, removing free music classes from children, and cuts which would result in the closure of the entire Citizens Advice Bureau network. So will the First Minister look the people of Dumfries and Galloway in the eye and answer this question? Why are these cuts being proposed? Is it because the SNP government here in Edinburgh is not properly funding Dumfries and Galloway Council? Or is it because this SNP-run administration is not properly managing its finances?
First Minister.
The local government settlement provides a record funding settlement of over £15.1 billion, an increase of over £1 billion, or 5.5% in real terms compared to 2024-25. And local authorities have got to look at all of the choices and issues that affect the delivery of public services, and that's exactly what Dumfries and Galloway Council will be doing. I would point out that the administration in Dumfries and Galloway is led by my party. I'm very proud of the work of my party leadership in Dumfries and Galloway. They have taken over from the Conservatives. And, of course, as usual, everyone that takes over from the Conservatives has got to clean up the mess that the Conservatives leave behind them. And lastly, Presiding Officer, let me just say to Mr Hoy, it's a bit rich, Mr Hoy, coming to this Parliament asking for more money for local government when he's not even prepared to vote for the money that we've put in place in the first place. It's yet more hypocrisy from the Conservatives.
Martin Whitfield.
Grateful, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of the Chief Constable's comments this week to Criminal Justice Committee that reports of online child abuse have more than doubled in the past year. Children First Chief Executive Mary Glasgow has said that Scotland is, quote, sleepwalking into the digital destruction of childhood. So can I ask the First Minister, how will the young people of Scotland see the commitment of the First Minister and his government to meet this crisis? And how will the Scottish Government draw on children's services, education, child protection, justice, third sector and technology companies to solve this crisis?
First Minister.
Well, I acknowledge the seriousness of the point raised with me by Martin Whitfield and also the comments made by the Chief Constable. And, of course, Police Scotland have adapted and changed their presence and the composition of their staff to make sure they've got more capability to interrupt the networks that Mr Whitfield has put to us. I pay tribute to Police Scotland in that respect. The National Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Strategic Group, which comprises operational partners including Police Scotland, is taking forward a series of priorities and actions to effectively prevent, disrupt and provide support to victims of child sexual abuse and their families. So I assure Mr Whitfield of the determination of my government to work with all relevant partners, including Mary Glasgow, who I met yesterday and who's a fantastic individual and advocate on behalf of children, that we will do everything in our powers to address this situation. But, and I don't make this point in any way pejoratively, I make it deadly seriously, the regulation of social media companies is the preserve of the United Kingdom Government and Ofcom. And I will be the most trenchant supporter of the toughest measures that we can put in place, the United Kingdom Government will put in place to regulate these individuals and organisations. Now, there are steps being taken forward by the UK Government in its Online Safety Act, but I do say that we will be prepared to work with the UK Government to maximise the effectiveness of those measures. We will take all the actions we can. I assure Mr Whitfield of that, but we also need to have the toughest stance on these organisations, because there is a lawlessness out there online. It's damaging our children and it has got to be arrested.
Audrey Nicholl.
A recent report from Aberdeen and Grampian Chamber of Commerce has found that 1 in 4 businesses in the North East have cut jobs as a result of the UK Labour Government's fiscal regime. So does the First Minister agree with me that the UK Labour Government must urgently change course to protect the supply chain and local jobs? And can I ask, what steps can the Scottish Government take to protect industry and livelihoods in the North East?
First Minister.
President Officer, as I recounted in my answers to Mr Greer, there is some really significant economic challenge coming to individuals who are employed in the North Sea oil and gas sector, which is why the issues that are raised by Audrey Nicholl are so serious. There is obviously the opportunity for us to build the renewable industries and the clean energies of the future, and the Scottish Government is taking that forward. But we have to do that. We have to make sure there is an alignment between that activity and the activities in relation to the oil and gas sector. Now, the Energy Profits Levy, which has been a key part of UK Government interventions, was always supposed to be a temporary measure. I think anyone looking at the performance of the Energy Profits Levy will demonstrate that it is contributing. There are significant issues about its performance in relation to the public finances of the United Kingdom, and it's also having an effect on the oil and gas sector. So we have to, and employment in the oil and gas sector. So there has to be a very careful reassessment of the Energy Profits Levy, and I encourage the UK Government to do so.
Finlay Carson.
Presiding Officer, last week a receptionist in a local GP surgery in my constituency of Galloway had to call 999 for an ambulance for a patient. It took over 55 minutes for that call to be answered. And when it was, they were told there would be a 4-hour wait for an ambulance. And that doesn't take into consideration the 1-hour drive to the nearest A&E. First Minister, can you imagine being with a loved one who's suffered a heart attack or a stroke or an asthma attack and having to wait almost an hour just to have that call answered? So what reassurance can you give my constituents that they can expect a fit-for-purpose emergency response, both in getting through to 99 and receiving a timely ambulance care? Because there's no way that this is an emergency response. So what urgent action will you take to stop such unacceptable delays?
Through the chair, please. First Minister.
Well, if Mr Carson wants to furnish me with the details of the specific case, I will examine it, because certainly that length of time in waiting for a call to be answered sounds to me to be completely unacceptable. So if Mr Carson gives me those details, I'll look at them. What I would say to him is that the median response time for purple calls was 7 minutes 51 seconds, and the ambulance service will work extremely hard to make sure it meets the expectations of the public.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last week, my constituent waited for over 6 hours after presenting at A&E with significant blood loss and in severe pain. Not only was he left for hours, he was kept on a plastic chair with no blanket or no pain relief. Having lost blood, he was extremely cold and could have become hypothermic. Another constituent attended A&E following gallbladder removal. She had been vomiting, was in agony, and hadn't been to the toilet for ages. She was left sitting in a corridor without pain relief or medical attention for an entire day. They don't need apologies, First Minister. They need action. So can I ask the First Minister, what specific action will he take to ensure that my constituents get seen quickly and are warm, comfortable and given appropriate pain relief and not abandoned in a corridor to fend for themselves whilst they wait?
First Minister.
President Officer, the action that I take is the action I take every single week, which is I meet with the leadership of the National Health Service to press for the strongest possible performance in our National Health Service. And as I explained to Mr Sarwar a moment ago, the fruits of that activity is that we now see falling waiting lists, we see a reduction in long waits, we see more people being treated within our National Health Service, and that will be the focus of my attention. Just on Tuesday, I met, along with the Health Secretary, with the Chief Executives of all of the National Health Service boards around the country to reiterate the importance of timely attention to scheduled and unscheduled care, and it's unscheduled care that Pam Duncan-Glancy is raising with me, and that was the subject of discussion along with maternity issues with the Health Service leadership, and that will continue to be my focus.
Michael Matheson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister aware that energy bills across Scotland have risen yet again. This increase has been partly caused by the UK Labour Government's costly nuclear tax that we are now paying for Sizewell C, the world's most expensive nuclear plant. It's estimated that this will cost Scottish households something in the region of £300 million over the course of the next decade alone. Can the First Minister advise what assessment has the Scottish Government made of the impact that this will have on Scottish households? And does he agree with me that further expansion of nuclear power will simply not only bring environmental risks, but also the risk of pushing up energy prices even further?
First Minister.
So this issue lies at the heart of the choices that are to be made about our energy future. It's why I believe that expanding our renewables, storage, hydrogen and carbon capture activities will help us to build an affordable, resilient and clean energy system. And that's why I do not support the development of nuclear power resources in Scotland, because I think they are expensive and we have alternative sources that are much cheaper. And of course, the practical effect of all of this is that a Labour government that pledged to cut bills by £300 has presided over an increase of bills of £190 since the time of the general election. So let's just hear that again. The Labour government promised to reduce bills by £300 and they've gone up by £190. No wonder the people of this country don't trust the Labour Party in Scotland.
Thank you. I'm going to take two further brief supplementaries. Stephen Kerr.
Presiding Officer, earlier this week I wrote to the First Minister urging the Scottish Government to support the Public Office Accountability Bill, the so-called Hillsborough Law, and to bring forward a legislative consent motion so that its provisions can be fully applied to Scotland. The bill, which is now past its second reading in the House of Commons, establishes a statutory duty of candour for all in public office and guarantees parity of legal representation and non-means-tested legal aid for families impacted by state failures. Will the First Minister ensure families in Scotland are not left at a disadvantage in seeking truth and justice?
First Minister.
The Scottish Government is in dialogue with the UK Government about this bill. In principle, we are supportive of the bill. We've obviously got to go through the process of consideration around legislative consent, which the Scottish Government will do in a timorous fashion, and of course Parliament will be engaged in the consideration of that legislative consent. But I do think it is important that the principles and the values enshrined in that bill are taken forward.
Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, Cameron Barracks in Inverness is close to the city centre. It's near two schools and it lies in a residential area. Many constituents harbour serious concerns about the Home Office plans to house up to 300 unchecked males of whatever colour, concerns not born of racism. So will the First Minister do something that he has not done so far? Will he publicly and expressly call on the UK Government to rethink these proposals, to abandon Cameron Barracks' location, and to work positively with the UK Government to come up with a fair, reasonable, suitable location which many people of compassion in Inverness feel is the right approach?
First Minister.
Sir, I want to assure Mr Ewing that we are engaging constructively with the United Kingdom Government on the issue of housing of asylum seekers, and particularly in relation to the Cameron Barracks proposal. The Social Justice Secretary answered a question in Parliament in some detail on this issue, and set out the importance of dialogue to ensure that the very legitimate issues and practical concerns that I understand will be debated today by the Highland Council are properly and fully addressed. Now, the Social Justice Secretary had a conversation with the UK Government on Tuesday morning, and we've set out to the UK Government the range of practical questions that have got to be explored to address the understandable issues that Mr Ewing is raising on behalf of his constituents. But I have to say, and I say this just for transparency with Parliament, there is no substantive, detailed response to the legitimate points that are being put forward. Now, that's the starting point for any consideration of this issue. There must be substantive engagement on the issues of substance so that members of the public in the Inverness area, or the Highland Council, or the Scottish Government can come to a conclusion about an issue that's got to be addressed. I have asylum seekers who are housed in my own constituency, and they are supported with appropriate support arrangements right in the heart of my constituency in the city of Perth. So I recognise this task has got to be undertaken, but there has to be good, substantive engagement with communities and public authorities, and regrettably, in relation to Cameron Barracks, that has been completely absent from the United Kingdom Government.
That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a member's business debate in the name of Audrey Nicholl, and there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and the public gallery to do so.